Good morning, everyone. My name is John Haslam, and I'm with Alexion Pharmaceuticals. It's a pleasure to be here today, as always, and I always find it a privilege to be invited to speak at these types of conferences. I'd like to thank Mitch and Joe particularly for not giving me the topic of PMPRB, or else we'd have to listen to the entire Tom Petty collection to get me off the stage. So my topic today is orphan drugs in Canada, and where do we go from here? And the first question to ask is, where is here? And 10 years ago, the government of Canada decided that orphan drugs were very important, and we're moving towards legislation to put in place to help patients with rare diseases. Unfortunately, that never came to fruition. And, we are at a point in time where little has been done, unfortunately, on orphan drugs. And we're also at a point in time where the public confidence in our industry and in the pharmaceutical companies is at an all-time low. Time to access orphan drugs is, in fact, at an all-time high. And we're seeing more barriers, public payers adding additional layers of bureaucracy, such as the PCPA office, and PMPRB modernizing discussions and focusing on high-cost drugs. And also even private payers, where once, we could, have, our drugs covered quickly and effectively and offer choice to patients, they are adding more barriers to the marketplace and really adding more challenges to access for patients. And then, of course, we all answer to global head offices, and there's a perception amongst them about, is Canada really a place that we want to do business in? And so in that context, we have to push forward. And when we talk about orphan drugs, many of you realize that in 1983, the U.S. Orphan Drug Act was one of the first to spur innovation in this area. And prior to that, only 10 products had ever been developed for orphan diseases. And now we can see not only is orphan drug legislation and policy across the U.S., Europe, and many other countries, it is something that is a must for these countries to support patients with rare diseases. And so that brings me to my first question, which is, which of these countries does not have an orphan drug policy? And no, it's not Estonia, so 96%, so not bad. But yes, actually, Kazakhstan and Malta do have orphan drug policies. It's Canada that does not. And that's in this report by PharmaChat, a syndicated report on orphan drugs, and a very insightful report which really outlays the various countries where orphan drug legislation is available and makes a difference for patients. And what we see in this report, which is very interesting, is that the Common Drug Review and CADTH actually, they only approve about a third of drugs for orphan diseases compared to the actual average of about 50%. The track record isn't very good for common drugs, but is even worse for orphan drugs. And so when I talk about the 33 drugs for rare diseases that have come to Canada since 2004, what do you think is the number of drugs that have actually been approved by all provinces? Actually, the answer is D, 11. And what's interesting, as we go to the next slide, only 11 of these 33 drugs for rare diseases have actually been reimbursed by all 10 provinces, which speaks to the issue of cross provinces and the variability in funding of patients with rare diseases. And at the end of the day, and putting it simply, many Canadians with rare diseases cannot have access to the vast majority of drugs that are available in the EU and the US, and they have to go or under either their healthcare provider or their patient association or advocacy organization really has to go to heroic measures to get them access to these therapies. And that's something that has to change. And so the topic is, where do we go from here? And what I'm here to tell you is that the answer is right in front of us. There's been a lot of good work that's been done over the last several years, both by CORD, which is the Canadian Organization for Rare Disorders, and putting forward a strategy for all Canadians when it comes to rare disease, as well as Health Canada, who put together the orphan drug regulatory framework. Unfortunately, that has been stalled in terms of the federal government, and something that really needs to be pushed forward. And then Biotech Canada, and I have the privilege of chairing the Orphan Drug Working Group for Biotech Canada, and we've put together a white paper on the path forward for these therapies. So there is a plan, there are plans, it just has to be executed. And what I'll submit to you is that the answer is actually up to us. We must work together, and it was nice to see my colleagues from IMC with Ronnie and Chris and Ed speaking this morning, and we really do have to change the paradigm. And I know we're going to hear from Elaine later today, and IMC and Biotech Canada must really work together to support a different paradigm on this topic. And we must change the dialogue. It's critical as an industry that we change the dialogue on this. And when we think about all the innovations, and Chris showed tremendous innovation and talked about everybody knows the price, but nobody knows the value. The reality is that it's up to us to change that dialogue and work with all stakeholders. And we must find a way to bring that innovation to our industry and, more importantly, to Canadian patients. And what's at stake? Well, what's at stake is access to innovation. And when we think about innovation in the pharmaceutical industry, it has had more impact on healthcare and the health of Canadians than any other element in the healthcare system. And importantly, that brings access, and access to hope for patients and their families is absolutely critical. Many of you, if you were here last year, you heard me talk a little bit about one of our products, which along the lines of the Herceptins of the world and the Sovaldis of the world, which provide tremendous innovation. Strensiq, or aspartase alpha, was a Canadian developed innovation, and we're very proud of that, and one that actually has a profound impact on infants and patients of all ages, really, in helping to build bone. And what I submit to you again is that when we talk about this industry, we always have to remember the core of who we are and what we believe in is our patients and making a difference in theirs and their families' lives. And it really helps us to take patients from not being able to walk, in this case and in this scenario, to innovations that not only help them to walk, and help them to make a difference and have a wonderful life, but actually being able to run and move on to, just being a normal person. And that's what our industry offers the Canadian public. It takes disease and the challenges that these families and patients face and turns it into just a normal life, which is something we all take for granted sometimes, but makes a true difference to those who suffer from it. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation early. Thank you for that.